Hello and welcome. I'm Katefara. My guest today, Dr. Gabisa Jeta, a distinguished professor at Purdue University in the United States, is also a World Food Prize laureate for his groundbreaking work on sorghum. He's also very keen on education. Professor Gabisa Jeta, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here.
I'd like to start, this is very unusual, but I have to start from point A. You growing up as a kid way back in the 60s in Ethiopia. You never wanted to be involved in what you're doing today. You never dreamed to be involved in agriculture or related issues. You wanted to be an engineer.
True, but even that is further ahead, moving forward. Growing up as a young kid in West Central Ethiopia, even thinking about school wasn't within our reach. And
you had to walk for hours to get to school, the nearest school, right?
Yes, and initially the only schools available to us were church schools, just to count the alphabets and learn how to read and write. And then more and more of us were interested in getting modern education, and in my case, as I have told over and over again, it was my poor mother who decided that if I received modern education, life would be better for me and for her in the long run, and that's what started it. And as you said, the first school that I attended was about 20 kilometers from home, because there wasn't any school around where we lived.
It's very interesting for mothers to be of that influence to their kids. That's very unusual, isn't it? Because the position they have.
Not really, because mothers are always very influential, and mothers are very powerful in raising children, the contributions they make. But what is unusual, as you say, is an illiterate woman that would have the conviction that she would sacrifice to make sure that her only son would get an education, because if he did, life would be better for her son and perhaps for herself as well. That indeed is very unusual to me, and I'm sure I say very often, looking back, with all that had happened in my life, and I don't think she ever dreamed that things would turn out the way they did. Even if she didn't, to have had that kind of perspective, it's just very difficult to imagine. And so I kind of say maybe somewhat providential that she thought so.
But it is unusual. I mean, she not only set the course for you, but what's more even unusual is the fact that she told you to study agriculture. Why? What was... She never had any information, I'm assuming, because except for the fact that she was living in one of the rural villages.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because actually she did not. I think that story had been told and captured, but she did not. And I think...
Where did it come from then?
Later on. I think this is actually... I had already been admitted to a boarding school, to a high school in Jimma, and studied agriculture. And then I had to go on to college, and the college that was available to us for admission was Alama College of Agriculture, and
that was probably the only university that we had then.
The only college of agriculture that we had at the time, and that was, in my case, both the high school that I went to and the college that I went to was established by Oklahoma State University, sponsored by the .4 program, which was really the predecessor of the USAID. And so it was kind of automatic. If you passed the exam, we didn't have to take the ESLC exams to go to college in our time. We just needed to take a test from Alama to qualify.
And then that was straight.
And then we go straight to Alama. And then it was Alama, this story of studying agriculture came about. And that is that I wanted to study engineering, and because I liked math, and I thought I would be good at studying that. And I spent a couple of weeks, and the courses that were being presented I was beginning to believe that I wasn't sure how they would be related to problem solving. And so I went seeking counsel by a department head in the plant sciences department, and he was the person who actually switched gears for me and said, if you would study plant sciences, you have a greater likelihood of livelihood change for the poor through what you did. And the way he was getting that from was he had just returned from the United States, having pursued a doctoral program at University of Minnesota, which was the university where Noam Borlaug had gone to. And so Noam Borlaug had just received his Nobel Prize for his contribution in agriculture, and he used that as an example to encourage me to study plant sciences, to work on improvement of crops for the poor.
Very interesting. Let's make a very straight jump, to once you graduated from, was it Purdue University then? That's when you went to college and did your PhD, right?
My undergraduate college, as I said, was Alma, and then I went to graduate program, Purdue University, yes.
Exactly. That's when you you picked up the interest in sorghum, right?
Actually, I started working on sorghum even before I went to America. I had just finished college, and because very often in our time, students that scored relatively better than others would be approached about being retained in the same college where you've been to as junior faculty member, with the idea that they would be sent overseas to conduct graduate school and graduate studies and come back and teach. And the resource that made that possible for me was a grant from IDRC of Canada, given to one of the professors on campus to work on sorghum improvement. A good friend of mine, he now lives in Addis, Dr. Brani. And so he recruited about four young men from the same class, and he recruited us to work on sorghum.
And you persevered, right?
I persevered, yes. I persevered. I liked the crop and the importance of the crop for the poor, and all four were given the opportunity to study in Canada, and I kind of changed my mind and ended up going to the United States to work with the mentor that I worked for, and that has changed my life as a result of going to Purdue.
It's interesting because the turning point is culminated as a result of your work in the Sudan, right? Working on sorghum and coming up with what you did.
Yes. I think I had just finished my PhD in 1978, and those were kind of rough times in Ethiopia. And so I decided not to return, but yet I had the desire to come and work in developing countries. And so I wrote an international agency that had programs all over Africa, and I asked if I could be given an opportunity to work in the region where Ethiopia is located, but my intentions were to end up to Kenya, Uganda, or Tanzania. I didn't have any expectations Sudan would come in the picture, but they had a spot in Sudan, and they asked me if I would take it, and I did. And it turned out to be a marvelous assignment for me, because Sudanese are wonderful people. I enjoyed living and working there, and they accepted me as one of theirs. And sorghum was a very important crop, perhaps even more important than it is in Ethiopia. And so if you are a sorghum scientist, you are just the king in Sudan. And as it turned out, I was successful in...
You had that breakthrough, right?
I had a significant breakthrough, really a breakthrough that truly has changed the path of my professional life. I was young, coming out of graduate school, lots of energy and desire to make a difference, and I was given this huge opportunity to work in improving a crop that is of significant importance to the largest sorghum producer in the region. And fortunately, I lucked out. And
to make it more productive, right?
I developed
sorghum drought resistant and also that wheat.
Absolutely. Sorghum is a very drought-tolerant crop to start with. And so my challenge was, how can I develop a crop that is even more drought-tolerant than it is and make it more productive and deliver it to farm communities? And so I developed a new technology, new research methods on how to conduct for drought tolerance. And that approach succeeded, and then I packaged it on putting together a hybrid crop that is more productive than ever done before. And it was really the first time where a sorghum hybrid was discovered and developed and commercially made available. And then the most significant part of it is putting together a mechanism for the production, distribution, and marketing of seed.
And you have to put it to test, right? The farmers have to accept it, and you had to travel to several African countries to prove that, right?
Yes.
Was it easy in coming?
No. The science was easier than putting together the delivery mechanism, even though the science...
You mean from the receiving it from the farmers, or... This is what I'm trying to point out. I mean, you have new products.
Yes.
And our farmers tend to be more conservative because we've lived, with a certain crop forever. You don't want to see any change coming to that.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
No, you're absolutely right. And particularly when the farm communities you're dealing with have not been exposed to new technology. That first deployment process is very often very hard. And also when the technology is a technology that they had never been exposed to before, it makes it doubly difficult. And so here we have sorghum, a drought-tolerant crop, all by itself is not new to them. But we put it in a technology that I call hybrid sorghum to you, but it requires developing two sets of parents. And these parents are selected for drought tolerance, but then you're not making the parents available to the farmer. You make a cross, and that immediate seed you get from the cross is what you give to the farmer. But you do it in such a way that hybrid is reproducible every year, and the same performance parameter is made available to the farmer every year. And so the way we do that, and part of the problem that we ran into, was we developed one of the parent is genetically male sterile, so it doesn't produce the anthers that produce the pollen. And so that way, without doing anything at all, we just plant them side by side. The wind will blow the pollen from one parent, and this doesn't have any pollen anyway, and so the seed would be setting here. So we won't harvest any seed from this one. We will only harvest the seed only from the male sterile parent. Okay, that way the seed that is produced is exactly of the same genetic makeup every year. But in promoting this technology, we started telling the farmers so they would believe us. This is hybrid vigor, and to get it a hybrid vigor, we produced it on this genetically male sterile.
What was the result like?
The result was superior, but the culture issue is what came about and really gave us some problem. In a more paternalistic society, that idea of a male sterile issue became a problem, and so the farmers thought they would be sterile if they ate our sorghum.
Fast forward, 2009, you won the World Food Prize.
I did.
You ever expected that you were going to win that?
No, I did not.
It came as a surprise.
It was a total surprise.
One of the few prestigious prizes that I've ever heard of.
No, it's the highest honor anyone working in agriculture would get. It's a Nobel Prize for Agriculture. And so I did that work in Sudan, but the World Food Prize recognized two pieces of work that I had done. One was the drought-tolerant work in Sudan, and then when I went back to the United States, I embarked on a new line of research, and the parasitic weed, striga, is a major problem in Africa. And so...
It has always been.
Yeah, it has always been. And so I picked that up and developed a new novel approach to addressing the problem, and fortunately succeeded in understanding the genetics and the biology. We put together a process that involved chemistry, molecular biology, genetics, and plant breeding to address some of this problem.
It was multidisciplinary.
It was a multidisciplinary approach to develop the eventual product, and then again, just like in Sudan, we also thought about the delivery mechanisms, how to make sure that the farmers got the product and whether or not the product made a difference. And all of that work in the United States was done in the lab, not in the field. And then the confidence and the gumption that we had that eventually would translate into as good productivity when it was brought into Africa was a huge leap of faith, but it worked for us.
But still we keep on suffering from hunger, malnutrition, and so on and so forth. I mean, what you set out to address when you were a young kid at Alama University is not yet addressed. Does that make you a little bit uncomfortable with what you do? Because this is like people like you, one of the few great scientists in the field. You cannot solve this problem. I mean, at least not in your lifetime, in our lifetime. Does that make you a little bit...
Absolutely not. I think it may be a case of, is the glass half full or half empty? I like to think it is half full. We've come a long way, and science has contributed significantly to the lives of the poor in developing countries. And even if you take the situation in this country, we have had dramatic gains in new technologies that have come out and beginning to make a contribution to the lives of the poor. In the 90s, significant gains were made in exposing our farm communities to the use of improved seeds and fertilizers. Significant yield results are being obtained and reported by farmers that have adopted. But when you have 80 million people, even though you're making significant contribution, it doesn't show on aggregate statistics, because we got a lot of people that we need to reach. But to really label all of that as having succeeded is truly not right. But we've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go because we've got hundreds and millions of people that we need to reach with science and technology and innovation. And the emphasis then is, how can we accelerate this, and how can we learn the experiences of others to make sure that science does change livelihood of the poor in Africa as it has in other places. But that would take us in a totally different direction, and that is to really begin to think about what the bottlenecks are. And in my way of thinking, as I go around and speaking, what I say is that to really begin to have impact generated, having attraction on the ground, to bring about science-based development, what you need are, one, you need to have some way of generating the science and technology and innovation. The way to do that is to build your human capacity and strengthen the institutions in the country, because you can rely on foreign assistance in all kinds of things, but really the best way you can build your nation is by engaging your nationals and having that nation building come organically from within. And so you need science, technology, and innovation, and institutions that would allow you to generate the science and the technology, but also institutions that would support all of the institutional infrastructure for the educational programs, for the research program, for the delivery, for the seed production, for the financing, the credit, and the market. All of those institutions need to be developed.
That even makes your ideas a little bit more complex, because you are talking about a multi-headed ghost.
Absolutely. Basically. And that's why I say development is not something that would take place overnight. It's a generational, experiential process that would move from one generation to the next.
But you cannot start on all tracks. You cannot run on all tracks.
Of course you can. Of course you can, and that's exactly what's happening around us. But some of these tracks are further ahead than others. And so, if I may finish my thought, that the science and technology is important, the institutional building, the human capacity is important, but to be able to do this as effectively as you want to, you need to have the right sets of governance and policy and the leadership in the country that truly would believe in bringing about that kind of dramatic change in a nation. And so policy is important, governance is important, so that you need leaders that have that kind of perspective, that you need all of this to be put together as effectively as possible to move us forward. But as you said, it makes it an even more challenging process. And so what I'm saying is it needs to be done from one generation to another. What it means is it's not only enough to train the best talent possible, but it's equally important, even more, to retain that talent from within, so that you're producing a system where one generation is learning from the generation before, so that you've got some traction on the ground on all of those experiences gained. Not in many African countries today, what happens is you have an activity in the various sectors I described for a few years, and then people leave and you kind of start all over again, and that is not a way to develop a nation in any way.
How do you maintain that?
I think that's that's why I'm putting a lot of the responsibility on governance and policy. And I think you need to have the leadership determine the best way to move forward and make sure that there are things put in place to make sure that that would happen for a country.
Do you see hope along that line?
I think, again, a case of glass being half full, and that, you know, I tell people that in my own lifetime, in the last 40 years of my adulthood, and other than the first generation of African leaders that had come forward, that were truly dynamic, brought about independence to the nation, were really driven to bring about change in the continent. After that, after the first generation of those leaders, we really went down the drain with all the revolutions that have gone on, the conflict across the continent. But I am beginning to feel that there are a number of leaders today that are really committed to bring about science-based development to Africa. Yes, again, I'm very hopeful and very positive about what I'm seeing.
You've been appointed by President Obama as the science envoy for his government, right? Yes. And also you're advisor to U.S. aid. And you traveled to Ethiopia, not only to Ethiopia, to many African countries. Probably next week you will be on your way to Tanzania, right, for the same mission. What is the message that you want to bring here? Because this is how I want to look at it. I mean, as an Ethiopian American and as an African, there is that part of you here, and there is that American part of you, and you're representing the U.S. government. Do both go along?
Very, very well.
Really well?
Very, very well. Very, very well. And just to clarify, I've been very, very fortunate to be given 3 sets of responsibilities in the last 2-3 years with the U.S. government. Initially, the administrator of USAID, Dr. Rajiv Shah, I've worked with him before when he was at the Gates Foundation, and he asked me to serve as a special advisor with him for about a year. And then I was selected to be a science envoy in 2010, and this last year, at 2011, President Obama designated me to serve on the advisory board for the U.S. government, a board called BIFAD, the Board for International Food and Agriculture Development. So I've had these 3 responsibilities, 2 of them now, the BIFAD board and the U.S. science envoy. The mission that brought me on this trip to Ethiopia is the Science Envoy program. And the message for the gist of the Science Envoy is to really go travel to individual countries and look around to see the opportunities for scientific diplomacy and relationship between the United States and the particular nation I'm visiting. And if there are a range of programs that are not going well, to identify those that are others, how can we deepen those relationships? And if there are opportunities for bringing about new opportunities, we're also supposed to be looking at that. And so in terms of is there plurality between the two, there really are none. I think I'm particularly speaking for the government that had designated me as an envoy. I think the one consistent message that you see in the U.S. government under President Obama is one of the things that Africans would love to hear, and that is, he said, we need to look at aid as a way in which to transition ourselves out of the job. Aid is a way to have the local and the national people help themselves. And so all of the initiatives that he would like to see and encourage is a country-led initiative, and giving more and more of the responsibility to the nationals, and then finding a way to engage how to strengthen and empower and build capacity, strengthen institutions of the national programs. And this is exactly what the rest of Africans would want to hear.
But it's interesting, as I've said earlier, as you mentioned earlier too, you are advising a government agency which particularly deals with aid.
No, it is also a government that deals with technical assistance programs. And one of the things that I spent a lot of my time during this week was really focusing on the things that I think is of significant value in technical assistance.
Like what?
Capacity building. All of the institutions that are building capacity, and my own personal bias is, even though a poor country like Ethiopia has a lot of needs and a lot of priorities, my own way of looking at it is, of the expansion that is going on at tertiary education, we need to put a lot of attention, and we need to celebrate the expansion that is there. Because more and more of our young men and women did not have an opportunity to go to college. Now they do. But at the same time, we are creating a situation where the quality is being compromised because we don't have sufficient number of faculty with sufficient experience to be able to train well with the right set of skills and tools so that these graduates have these tools with which they would solve the critical problems of a country. And if that doesn't happen very quickly, I worry about what the ramifications are going to be moving forward. And so, and the sooner the solution is obtained is better. And so one of the things that I advocate is the more seasoned professionals in many of our universities in this country today, by themselves or with the help of others in the developed world, can sit down and put together some creative mechanisms upon which one can accelerate the graduate educational program so that college students are not being educated by someone who just graduated from college. And so the quality issue is very, very critical. And so the U.S. government and President Obama himself and the U.S. Administrator Rajiv Shah, to whom I report, and he has been an advocate of finding creative mechanisms of bringing about technical assistance program to strengthen African institutions, not only colleges, but also research and seed systems and extension services and so on. And so I think finding this great opportunity for having the national programs do the things that they could do best more, and then the areas in which they can't help themselves with, which is tertiary education with limited faculties, be open and engage with others to strengthen that.
That's all about partnership.
That's all a partnership, and I'm describing to you now partnership within education, partnership limited to public institutions. But the other thing that I also try to advocate is that, our government, the government of Ethiopia here, is committed in trying to do development work on its own. And I say government can't do it all. The government, it's wonderful to have a government that is committed to development, but I think the government that believes it can do it all, I think I have difficulty believing whether that is reality or not. And so one of the things that could be done, and the government is beginning to do, is opening up for more opportunities for the private sector, both from within and outside, so that this private sector would develop enough that they would begin to hire the young men and women that these institutions are generating in large numbers.
With so much responsibility, would you have time for research?
I do, and I'm stepping down. I'm rolling back and rolling off of these external responsibilities. But I'm a person that has interest not only in education and science and research, but I also have interest in policy issues. And over the years, I like to think that I have accumulated knowledge and experience that could be of use to a poor country like Ethiopia. And so if I have opportunities to provide service in that area, I'll be glad to. I have been doing that, and I'll continue to do that. But my love is really in teaching and in research, and I had just received a major grant from the Gates Foundation to pursue more of the work that I had done in the past to strengthen it even further in more dimension than before. And so I'm getting back into the lab to do more of my research.
That's where you belong. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Gabbisa Ejeta. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.